I was trying a lot of different media out. I mean, I was doing painting, but also in grad school, I did sculptures and I made musical instruments and a little bit jack of all trades, master of none, which I also think is a strength of mine. But everybody has their own little secret superpowers, you know? And I wasn't listening to mine.
Y'all are going to love the guest today. Collin Leix is a designer and animator living in Michigan, doing work for the mighty Gunner Studio, now a part of Duolingo after they were acquired in 2022. Now, I first heard about Collin during the Blend conference a few years back when she showed off how she and the Gunner team figured out a way to sculpt and model environments in VR, and then used those sculpts in the conference opening film. It was amazing. And it made me realize that Collin is one of those people who isn't afraid to try mixing up a whole bunch of ideas to see what works, and I wanted to learn more about her. So she's on the podcast today, and we talk about a lot of things. Her background in fine art and music, her experience working in VR on actual real-world projects, what it's like working at Duolingo, and of course, we talk about AI. You're gonna love this one, so let's get to it. Collin, we meet again. Thank you so much for doing this. It's awesome to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. School of Motion has been in my brain for so long that it's such an honor to actually be participating.
Well, it's an honor to have you on. And, you know, I remember, I think I saw you give like a short little presentation maybe at Blend a long time ago about this cool like VR stuff you're doing. And then we got to meet at Half Res. And, you know, so like I'm a big fan of yours. Awesome to have you on here. So like I always kind of start these things like, oh, let's hear about your origin story. But actually, you had this really interesting quote that you wrote out for us. So everyone listening, when we bring a guest on, we always have them fill out this questionnaire. And Collin wrote, you know, in answer to the question, what's one of your biggest mistakes? You said, I wasted so much time trying to find out what I should be until I listened to myself and what I want to make, and then things took off. And I was curious what you meant by that. I think I kind of know, but I thought that might be an interesting place to start.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to know what's sort of like an interesting artistic origin story and what's just like an anxiety disorder. You know?
It's a fine line, yeah.
But you know, whatever. We're all humans. We're three-dimensional that way. Yeah, basically, I didn't study animation formally. So I think I always just kind of was going from gut feelings. And even just artistically, I'm someone that is always paying attention to people. I think I'm kind of a people pleaser. And that fed into me just sort of being like unsure of what my own true voice was. And I talked about how I did study painting and a classical violin and music, and those things came together. And that's how I came to animation. So I went to the University of Michigan to do a fine arts master's. And I came in as a painter. I was doing paintings that I would paint something kind of representational, like a classical oil painting, turn off the lights and project maps, and then trace that and then end up pixelating it. And that's the body of work I did when I came in. And I felt really invested in that. But then I got to Michigan and everything was concept first. And which is wonderful. It's part of why I was interested to go, but you had to almost explain work before you knew what it was. And that really got in my head. So I remember my second year prepping for a critique. This wonderful painter, Jim Cogswell, was an artist who was going to come give me a critique. He walked in and kind of looked around and said, okay, I see the work you laid out for me. Now, what did you just hide? What did you hide upon me coming in? And I said, actually, there's something I did just totally hide. I had gone through an atlas and cut out every pink country just because they're pink. And then I lined them up vertically where, like, if there's a river that left one, I would line that up with the river starting in another. And just kind of, I didn't know why. And that ended up leading to my first animation. So it's tough. I think in a world where sometimes people feel like they have to explain themselves, your voice kind of gets lost because your intuition isn't explainable always.
Wow. Okay, I love this. I want you to say a little bit more about this. You said you thought you would have to explain work before you knew what it was. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. I think that's kind of one of the tough sides of academia and art meeting each other. Yeah, I guess that at least at U of M, that's kind of the vibe, that you want to be doing important work. You want to be doing rigorous work and work that's engaging with meaningful things. So you could say, okay, like I'm going to make work about, this war or this social issue. And you're kind of explaining it before it even gets made. And I think some of the best stuff comes from a, blah, just like, I don't know why I want to cut out these pink maps and put them next to each other. And you can kind of figure it out later.
That's really interesting. Okay. It's funny. So when I almost came at this from the opposite way, I think. I kind of want to play with this a little bit. So like when I got into my first studio, so like I was doing After Effects and animation and stuff for years before I was any good at it at all. And then I finally got in with this studio near Boston, and I was working with like really good designers who came from a background of, like some of them went to art school and stuff like that. And that's where I actually learned the importance of having a concept that you can point to when someone says, why did you do that on your storyboard, right? But then the point you're making is sometimes you can take that too far. And sometimes you just have to be like, I wonder what would happen if I cut out all the pink countries. Exactly. Yeah. So I'm curious how how have you sort of managed that tension? Because, working in an industry, it's a business, right? Like, yeah. I imagine like, your clients hire you and they hire Gunnar and now you're at Duolingo and we'll talk about that. But you're being hired for like the beautiful work you can create, but also it has to solve a business problem. So isn't there kind of two sides to it? Definitely. I mean, I feel like it helps to think divergently and then convergently. So just like letting your thoughts really kind of go out there and then picking what you want to sort of stitch together. So really it's kind of just the brainstorming stage. Letting the brainstorm have some dignity and not feeling like it's just a quick thing to rush through. And that's something Gunnar was really good about, is just letting that sort of divergent, wild, brainstormy phase last sometimes like a really long time. Yeah. Especially coming in from after, freelancing on my own, which I did for a couple years. We would be doing a 15-second thing and we would say 5 weeks. We need 5 weeks for it. And I'd be like, what? With this team of all these people, are you serious? Yeah. But yeah, there's sort of building in a little bit of space and defending the need for the brainstorming, dreaming phase. I think that's kind of where the two can work together well. So we're going to talk about Gunnar and Duolingo, but I want to kind of like, I keep hearing this term. Let's double click on that. I don't know where it came from. I haven't heard that. We're going to double click on this. Okay. So it's just in the zeitgeist right now. Because I've seen it work both ways, right? So some studios, it sounds like Gunnar is certainly like this. They're kind of all about that blue sky thinking. And it's like, okay, yeah, we're making, ostensibly, this is a commercial for a music streaming platform. So it needs to somehow tie into that. But it could just be totally abstract and we could do it with crayons and stop motion. And, so how does Gunnar and how in your experience have these brainstorms sort of gone where you can pull out really cool ideas that maybe feel like they just come out of the ether. Yeah, they're not connected to anything. Yet they do have to work and make sense. So what does that look like? Yeah, interesting. So something at Gunnar that we would always do is like, if you would notice, okay, somebody actually has some time off. If there's space, the space in between projects, that's where we would make like our Instagram posts, where somebody would be like, oh, I have an idea for an Instagram post. It's just kind of these colors going like blah, 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 just kind of like something that somebody just wants to make. And that's where I feel like what we did at Gunnar and are still doing at Duolingo actually is finding space for something that's half art, half design. And where I feel like that difference is in definition is like an art might just kind of come through you in a personal way, and design is actually starting outside of you as a problem that you're going to solve. So I feel like, and I maybe other people would disagree with that, but that's my experience at least. So we would make space for little explorations like that and give them space. Like those little back burner ideas. Actually, if you were like, okay, I have maybe a couple days waiting for something, or like one person isn't needed for a couple weeks, then actually you turn the pressure up a little bit. Like, okay, make something. And even if it's a 5-second loop, and we're going to, really craft it and make it next level and put it online. So if you actually cultivate all of those back burner ideas and get them out, even in little chunks, and put them out in the world, you're creating kind of a little visual library of cool ideas that maybe don't have a place yet. And you're also
showing a breadth of sort of expression, style, motion, combinations of things that clients can come to you for, which was kind of interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we use that time in between things to sort of cultivate ideas that don't necessarily have a place yet.
Yeah. And do those ideas, do they ever actually make it into a client project? Like, are there any examples you can remember?
Oh, let me see. Yeah, there were definitely ideas where somebody would say, I want that. Ian Sigmund and John Hughes had done an experiment of a guy kind of on a tabletop, and he's in 2D, and he's watching this sort of a top, like a spinning top move, and it's 3D. Yeah. And through it, you can see a complete 3D guy with 3D hands and stuff. I know that came back around to some work for clients. And that was just kind of a wouldn't it be cool if idea.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay. So then I guess that kind of speaks to the importance of, even if you're doing motion design, which is like it's a business and all of that. If there's this core of like, okay, you have to kind of combine both worlds, I guess, is kind of what I'm hearing. And I love the way you put it. You said art tends to bubble up from inside you. Design, you're kind of reacting to like external forces.
Yeah.
We sort of got into this conversation because you pointed out that like earlier in your career, you really didn't listen to your inner artist, right? And maybe you were trying to think too hard. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. Like what are the downsides that you saw or the impacts of sort of suppressing those kooky ideas that don't actually attach to anything obvious?
Yeah. I just wasn't flourishing. I was trying a lot of different media out. I mean, I was doing painting, but also in grad school, I did sculptures and I made musical instruments and a little bit jack of all trades, master of none, which I also think is a strength of mine. And I know that you've talked about this, that sort of like generalist, or what was the term, multi-stack?
Oh, full stack designer. I kind of stole that term, but yeah. I've been using that lately. Yeah.
Which I do think actually is a helpful thing to have in this industry. But everybody has their own little secret superpowers, and I wasn't listening to mine. Sort of my messiness and everything's kind of squishy and but then also kind of realism. It wasn't necessarily in style, so I didn't find a place for it. I know like representationalism was not in some circles. So I was trying to make things that were more conceptual. But I also didn't study art in my 20s. I was studying French literature and art history in undergrad. So I also I hit the snooze button on really becoming an artist.
Right.
Until, I guess it was my mid-20s I got into it again, but I didn't study it in college.
So then your fine art experience, was that when you went to University of Michigan? Go Wolverines, congratulations. Happy for you, by the way. If people don't know, they just won the college football championship this year, which very, very long time coming.
I actually didn't know that.
Oh my God.
I'm a terrible Wolverine.
Oh, wow.
I've seen some flags pop up around here. Like,
yeah. So that's what we call a rah-rah school. And that's funny that you didn't know that. Okay. Yes.
I'm so not sports.
Yeah. All of my Michigan friends went absolutely insane when that happened. So.
Oh, go us. That's great. Yeah. So Michigan, but I went to the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and that was wonderful.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh my God. My wife, when I met her, she lived right down the street from there. So.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a wonderful school.
We'll have to share Boston stories. You also said this in your questionnaire. You said you came at animation sideways. And okay, so you've already kind of mentioned you didn't study animation. You studied, painting and violin. Language. How did all these things sort of come together? Like, because I'm assuming at some point in your studies, you realize, okay, I'm going to have to figure out how to make money doing this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh.
And I've got this collection of skills. What do I do with them? How did that sort of turn into a career for you?
That's so funny you say that. It was in grad school. I was painting, and I was also trying to compose music. And it's so hard to come up with ideas that I was trying to come up with little cheats. So I had this system of looking at maps, at like geographical visuals, and saying, okay, I'll take the volume from this line, and the pitch from this line, and just kind of composing music just to start from something because I was kind of lazy. And so I had these maps that I was like playing violin from, and then I had somebody sort of move their finger along it to sort of play with, if that makes sense. And my friends were like, this is time-based. Like, you need to just work with time instead of making a painting that you're going to like play. It didn't work very well. And became way more interesting to actually play with just the motion of how something moves across space. So I became super interested in that.
How long have you been playing violin?
Since I was 5. Yeah.
Okay. I'm fascinated by violin, and it's interesting. I'm trying to find little connections here. So violin, my wife at one point decided she wanted to try playing violin. I'm a musician. I play drums, play guitar. But violin is different than those two things, because a violin, when you pick it up, and maybe you disagree, but everyone I've ever heard pick up a violin for the first time and you try to play it, it makes the worst noise you've ever heard in your life. And that's the only noise you can make for a while. You cannot make a beautiful noise on that thing for like a while. The learning curve on something like that and the sucking at it is just way more painful on a violin, I think. But that's got to be pretty good training for something like painting, which I imagine is also a similar, like I can't paint, so like I imagine that's kind of a learning curve. Were you always kind of attracted to stuff like that? Like, has difficulty been something you're drawn to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, both are pretty unforgiving.
Yeah,
I don't know. I feel like anything that I've learned in terms of tech has been to try to like avoid a problem in the other things that I know. So I guess that's where that difficulty comes from. It's actually laziness. Like, I've learned 3D to try to not do cell.
Same.
Right? Just like, this will just turn it around for me. But in terms of violin, no, I just thought it was a beautiful sound. And I think my mom just forced me over the hard parts when I was a kid. I wanted to quit really bad. But yeah, no, that's a good question. The violin stuff. Yeah, I did end up feeling really bored with the idea of classical violin. It was like a cover band. I didn't want to spend my life in an orchestra because it's just playing things that have already been created. So I chose visual art to be able to do newer things. And that's not giving enough credit to classical music, especially not contemporary music. But
yeah, this is a little bit of a rabbit hole. But like I saw an interview with Stuart Copeland. He's the drummer of the Police. And he made this really interesting comparison. I'm curious what you'll think of this. So orchestral and sort of classical musicians, he calls them musicians of the eye. And then like rock musicians or jazz musicians or blues, they're musicians of the ear. And the difference is, like, I'm a musician of the ear. I can't read music, but I can like hear something in my head and then I just have to go do it.
Yeah.
And I can hear something else someone's doing and I play off of that. But the thought of like, I'm going to just read this sheet music and just play it exactly the right way and that I'm a technician in that way, that doesn't appeal to me at all. But like, if you're a classical musician, that is your job. That's what you're doing.
Right.
So I'm curious if that resonates at all, and maybe that answers my next question, which was like, well, why didn't you pursue, a classical, career in music or something like that?
Yeah. No, I feel like with violin, I was trained in an orchestra. And then I actually joined a band when I lived in Boston, and they were like, oh, cool, like a fiddle, like we can fiddle. And
awesome.
They would want to be like, take it away. And I couldn't do it. It was like asking a classically trained ballerina to break dance all of a sudden. Like, I can't do that. I can't think that sort of wildly. So I'm also more of an ear person. So I think just kind of the more like sloppy, intuitive stuff, I think that's a lot more interesting to do.
Gotcha. So you've got this interesting background that, what's cool about this industry, and especially because I know, some other people at Gunner, like, it's the wildest, different, diverse backgrounds, like everyone comes from some different universe, basically. And that's really cool. But you have at least, a master's degree and you've got some sort of fine art background. And a lot of people that end up in this industry don't have any of that. Like I have a college degree, but it's in like film and television. I basically learned to like use like a Steenbeck editing machine and like a film cameras. Like it was had nothing to do with what I do now, basically. And so I don't have fine art background at all. And so I had to like learn that kind of on the job, like learn color theory and stuff like that. You've probably had to learn other things, like technical skills. Yeah. Maybe like I came in knowing some of those things. So I'm curious if you notice, because you work with all kinds of like different artists, how you approach things versus how someone who doesn't have that fine art thing.
Yeah.
How that, like, I'm curious if you can talk about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I mean, stuff like file organization and all of that was like totally new to me. I was an absolute mess coming into it. So that kind of best practices and all of that, I had to sort of learn that the hard way. But coming from a fine art background, I noticed I had more experience with like materiality. Even if you end up in the digital world, it's so good for you to explore more media. It's just kind of wide divergent thinking of, I don't know, different looks that you can bring to something. And like I talked about, when you're coming from fine arts, you are the generator of the content, the problem solving. And I think you don't really get a brief when you're in art class. And I think also if you had gone to art school, you'd be more likely to have art history classes. So just more context and things to draw on. And maybe I don't mean to undersell motion design programs, but I don't think they have as much of that. If you have no training in art history, look up Matisse cutouts. Matisse. It's you'll see that sort of trendy loose leaf shape that's just like been really in for the last couple of years. But that was being made 80 years ago.
Right.
So pulling on inspiration from the past, I think that's been an extra nice skill to have.
Yeah, that's something that I definitely missed out on. And I remember seeing things that like, PSYOP would do back in the 2000s, and it would look like old sort of Soviet posters, that kind of style. But I didn't know what the name for it was. I still don't really know the name for it, and I can imagine how like you don't have as much ammo, I guess, when you're like, what are all my options? So when you're talking about, you said coming from a fine art background, you're much more aware of materiality, I think is what you said. I'm curious what you mean by that. Like, one thing that it's kind of like a constant struggle when you're making art on a computer is it looks too perfect, and you have to do all these tricks to like beat it up so it doesn't look perfect.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you mean? Like, because
yes.
your work always has like texture, and even if you're doing it digitally or with a VR headset on, it still looks, you see the human hand is in it. You can see it,
Yeah. And that's kind of just like my sort of leaning. I like for things to be kind of squishy and painterly. But I also feel like it just would benefit somebody from studying sculpture or painting. Like I see actually a lot of artists right now are doing ceramics. That's kind of a thing that people are trying out. And it can only help sort of how you approach turning things in space or sort of storytelling. Sometimes the camera is actually moving through space. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I know like Marcus Bacchi, who worked at Gunnar for years, and now he's freelance. He's an amazing painter. And he didn't study art at all. He would go to museums and study and teach himself art. And I would see that come out in his designs in ways that it's sort of, he didn't even realize.
Yeah. That's the tricky thing about it, and I think there's a certain type of person that's like, I like to be fairly literal, and I just want to know the answer sometimes. Like, no, just tell me like how big to make the rectangle,
yeah.
Collin, please. Just exactly. and a lot of times it's like what you're saying before. There's an intuition you have to listen to, but maybe that intuition gets louder the more you actually like pay attention to art, and kind of see things. Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough. It's tough because you have to still bring the action, and it's just not totally clear where you're going when things are kind of in that stage where things are undone. So that idea of continuing to take steps, even if you can't see the ground in front of you, that takes practice. Just like, this is what I do. This is my job.
Yeah. AI to the rescue. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. That's called a tease right there. Okay. So let's get to Gunnar now. So I'm trying to think, like, were you there? So years ago, I showed up with Amy Unger and some other people from School of Motion, and we shot like a little kind of mini documentary at Gunnar. I can't remember if you were there though.
I was out that week. I think I was actually on maternity leave with my first baby.
Oh, wow. Well, now you're on maternity leave as of this recording with number 2. So look at that. Full circle.
Full circle.
So for everyone listening, we have a free class called The Path to MoGraph, and Gunnar's featured in that. So that's what I'm talking about. So at that point, Gunnar, I think had been around for a few years, but still felt fairly new and had just started to sort of like make a name for itself, not just for the clients that it was servicing, but also for like other artists in the industry started to notice like, wow, there's some amazing stuff coming out of this, like frosty Detroit, studio. So how did you end up there, with your kind of, it's not like a traditional motion designer background, Like, how did you get there? Did you know After Effects when you got there? Like,
I
how'd that
did.
work?
Yes. Let's see. You had talked about trying to figure out how to make money after school, which is funny.
Important.
I was, my work at that point was so separate. What I was getting paid for and then what I was showing to the world, there was like no overlap when I first started out. And let's see. So I finished grad school in 2012, started learning After Effects actually at the community college in Ann Arbor, Washtenaw Community College, which is wonderful.
Nice.
And also just kind of teaching myself. Took a School of Motion class. It was wonderful. And yeah, so I definitely had After Effects skills, but it was usually serving something weird, like some idea that I had, or something that was very separate that I didn't really show that much. Like I worked for 3 months for gas station television, GSTV.
Oh,
That was
nice.
my first freelance job. But at the same time, I was trying to learn on my own work how to like morph 2D, 3D, texturing, painting. So it's funny. I feel like the work that got me into Gunner was definitely more like me pushing my own artistic stuff out in the world and playing around. I was in VR, which they thought was kind of interesting. I brought in my Vive setup in 2017 just to like hang out there and had to set up my big shaky towers and stuff. So I think they thought it was interesting that I was experimenting, even though I was like definitely not a big name or anything. I met them through a meetup in Detroit, MoGraph Mondays meetup. Shout out to Julie Kraft, who created that meeting in person. And I think what got me in the door was being sort of someone that was like fine to spend time with. Like we got along really well. And then I was just kind of doing experimental things that they were like, how did she make that? Even just a couple of small things. I definitely wasn't doing anything mind blowing, but starting to sort of bring my own voice into it.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, because that's the question I get asked the most is like, how do you get a job or how do I get work? And I mean, like, and I always tell people like, I mean, the easiest way is you find a way to meet someone in person, face to face.
Absolutely.
There is no better networking tip than that.
Yeah.
As of this recording, we're starting to prepare for NAB this year. And it's like, I try to convince people like, even if you have no interest in going to Vegas, it's like the ultimate networking thing. Like you just to see people, like see their skin, like actually in the room with you. Like they're, not their digital. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why I just said it like that. Sounds creepy. When you put it that way. All right.
No, it's so true. Even just like, right. Seeing somebody in person. Oh, it's you get memories together. I remember EJ Hassenfratz. Did I pronounce that?
Hassenfratz, yes.
Hassenfratz. I got to meet EJ at a half res. And we were just joking around. And yeah, it was just very memorable because it was in person. Yeah, and I actually, this is embarrassing, but I offered my services to Gunner for free. I offered to work for free because I was a fangirl. I think I was the first person that was hired who was like a big fan, which is obviously really dorky to say. But I was taking an online master's at SCAD, and it was just 2016. And it wasn't quite what I wanted. SCAD is wonderful, but I think I would have liked the program better if I was in person. But I actually stopped halfway through. And at that point, I didn't know what else to do other than to stay in like the cozy womb of academia. Like I was in, It was like, there's too much school. So I was like, oh, I guess I'll do a master's in motion design. And then I learned about Gunner, and I just thought like, no, that is what I want. I saw a little promo that they had done with James Nolert, who's an amazing illustrator in Ann Arbor here. And it was this hand-drawn mountain, then all of a sudden the mountain turns in space. And I felt like this gut punch. And I was like, that is what I need. That's what I want. And they were like half an hour away from my home. So I went and visited one day, and we went out to lunch, and I wrote this long email to Brandon Dellis, the producer, and said like, I would like to work for you for free, and here's why you could benefit from having me there, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, nobody works for free. We'll never have anybody work for free for us. Just come in.
Yeah.
Let's do a 3-month trial or whatever, like a 3-month freelance testing out. Yeah, it was like what do you call that? Not permalance. I can't remember.
No, permalance is a dirty word.
It is a dirty word.
It was a test. It was, that's all it is.
Yeah,
a trial.
He said, let's come in for kind of a 3-month trial or whatever. And then they hired me at the end.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because I was like the most experienced big name animator ever, but it was because we had fun together. I worked really hard. I was at that point bringing myself fully to the table.
Yeah. Yeah. And your Vive VR headset, you brought that too.
I brought the Vive. Yeah, I did bring the Vive.
That's awesome. I mean, for the record, your work is also really, really good. You're also very talented.
You.
So that does help. But yeah, that is interesting though. I mean, I think there's this perception, and I've talked to Jorge about this a little bit. Jorge from Ordinary Folk, and you assume that studios like that and Gunner, they're just like overwhelmed with like just A+ artist after A+ artist, like applying, saying they'll work for free. It's not actually the case, and especially for a studio like Gunner. Now I don't know, maybe it's changed now, but I mean, it seemed like it was always pretty much an in-person studio. It wasn't like scattered throughout the country, right?
Yeah, the studio was in person. We would work with freelancers, around in Europe or LA or whatever.
Yeah. But the core team's in person, and so like the fact that you're in Michigan, even though you didn't know that University of Michigan's team won the championship.
Oh, I'm gonna be in big trouble for that.
I wonder if Ian and Nick knew that. Maybe they don't know that either. They may not be football guys either.
They probably know more. Yeah.
So now you're in. You got your foot in the door at Gunner, and you basically have never left. I mean, that was a while ago that you joined.
Yeah.
And this is another thing that like I know. Small studios like struggle with this because you just have less resources, and Gunner. I mean, I don't know how many people work under the Gunner sort of umbrella at Duolingo now, but it never grew into this massive thing, right? But it seemed like people would stay there for years.
Yeah.
There was something that just kept people there. So I'm curious what that is. Before we hear that answer, I wanted to tell you about something really cool that we offer at School of Motion. The Path to MoGraph is a 100% free 10-day class that will show you in detail what it looks like to work as a motion designer. You'll get to see inside some of the coolest studios on earth. You'll get to see a motion design project completed from start to finish, and you'll get a really good sense of the opportunities out there for designers, animators, and 3D artists. Check it out. The link is in the description, and it is totally free.
Yeah, I think the first people to leave, it was during the pandemic. Rachel and Marcus kind of spread their wings and flew off. Rachel Reed, if anyone's not familiar, she's an incredible
She's brilliant.
cell and 3D animator. I remember when she had a School of Motion interview in 2018, maybe?
Yeah. She actually, and she did some work for us. We had her do an intro for for part of a class, and it was all cell animated, and it's brilliant and awesome.
Oh, that was like one of the most special things I've ever seen. Like seeing her work on that was amazing.
Yeah.
She always had these little windows up of like studying kung fu, like in the corners, for like.
Yeah, of course she did. Yeah, it came out so good.
Oh, she's amazing.
Yeah, she's awesome.
I think she was ready to go, but that was after 4 years of totally intense, life-changing work. And yeah, Marcus had been there since the beginning. Marcus was the third artist at Gunner, and he's incredible as well. I think it's just a really wonderful place to be. And I know that sounds pretty lame or whatever. That sounds like people say it all the time. But no, I feel like I joined a band. And
that's awesome.
We're just not done. We're just not done. The work that we have to do together.
Your best material's ahead of you. I like it.
Yeah. So when we all sort of were onboarded to Duolingo, we did it all together. Like, what a weird experience to to start a new job, but with like 10 of your close friends. Yeah. Well,
I would definitely want to hear about the Duolingo thing. Let's take a little detour and talk about VR for a minute.
Okay.
Because you mentioned your Vive headset. And I think this is actually first how you kind of popped up on my radar, because Gunner did, I believe it was the last Blend conference. For anyone who doesn't know, Blend was this amazing conference that happened 3 times. And it was in Vancouver every time, amazing. They'd always do these incredible like intro films. and they would get a studio to make it. In the first year, I think it was Buck, and then maybe it was year 2 or 3, I can't remember, but Gunnar did it. And it was incredible.
Thank you.
And you, if I remember correctly, you actually used your VR, you somehow painted the landscapes in VR. Tell me the story, because it was so cool. And then you did a little presentation about it.
Yeah. They had these little things called 2-minute tips where I think at least 5 or 10 artists just popped up. And yeah, I was invited to do that. And the whole story, I started VR in 2016, and I was just painting in the world of VR. And then I would take the little camera inside and just walk around and show that it's 3D, and that's kind of it. Then I would post that video to Instagram, and that's how it lived. I didn't know how to get anything out of VR.
Right.
And I was always kind of nervous about that, and I would hit little roadblocks. It wasn't until Blend that I actually used the support of Gunnar. We worked together to get the mesh out of VR and actually back into Cinema 4D where we could use it as a normal thing. Basically, we got way in over our heads. We were like, let's do 4 minutes of fully 3D. And we'd never done something, A, that was 4 minutes, or B, for that long in full 3D, and for like no budget. So we actually called it Blend Nights, that we would all stay really late 2 times a week and just work on Blend. None of us had kids at that point.
That helps.
And, yeah, that helps.
Yeah.
And we wanted to build this lush world where there's like jungles and islands and coral reefs, but we didn't have that much time and we didn't have the resources, to like spend months on it.
Yeah.
So we realized that would be perfect use of just like, I can whip up a coral reef, no problem in VR, but how about getting it back into the computer? And also the issue was art directing it. Mm-hmm. That in VR, it was all kind of like fisheye, from in my experience, it would just be kind of drawing, and then it's hard to know what it's going to look like when you back up.
Right.
So basically our big epiphany was doing some base geometry in cinema from the view that we liked, and knowing that the little arch comes here and the island's here, sending that into Adobe Medium, painting all over it, and getting it back in. And the mesh back then was horrible too. It was like so dense and ugly. So getting it remeshed and everything. So I tried to condense that down into a 2-minute tip. And I feel like everybody else's tips were much more like approachable, like with a tool that they use. Hey, did you know you can click this? And I was like, okay, so here's how you send things to another dimension and back. Go. And it was like, I stepped off like, oh, I'm such an idiot. That didn't make any sense. But it was fun.
I remember that one though. I remember it because it was so. It was one of those things where it's like, I've never thought of doing that. I didn't know you could do that, and even now knowing that you can do it, it just seems so clunky. I don't know that I ever would, but like, it's amazing. And what was it about? So you mentioned Adobe Medium. I'm assuming that was the app that you were using. What was it about doing that in VR that was better or faster or whatever?
Yeah.
Than just modeling it, using ZBrush or something like that.
Yeah, ZBrush. I think that's just because I didn't know ZBrush.
Oh my God, that's so it was easier to figure out how to get this VR contraption to work than ZBrush is really hard to learn, by the way. So actually, I think you made the right choice.
Yeah. I think people are surprised to find out that Gunnar was like at some point only 6 artists. At that point, I think we were maybe like 8. So it was just like, okay, who's free? What skills do they have? Go for it. Just go try stuff out. But what's really fun is, and I've talked about this. I did a talk it was kind of a SIGGRAPH talk, kind of a Maxon 3D talk, a Maxon talk. Where, so if you want to hear me talk about this more and do a lot more hand gestures, how you can draw something in space and then grab it and twist it, and actually it's really embodied. And with making things in nature, I think that was a lot easier to just sort of use your body and sort of make the grass and make the trees and twist it, using the skills that you already have as just a person. Like using let's draw it this way instead of being click, click, click.
I think I asked you about this at Half Raz, but now you're making me think of it again. So like, I think, the tool that you're using does tend to inform your artwork a little bit more than most people want to admit, right? And, so if I open Photoshop, I have like 24 tricks. I know it's going to make it, I know if I do a drop shadow this way, it's going to work. And you tend to fall back on those things. But, you have a painting background where you can't fake anything. Like you have to like literally every single thing on there, your hand has to put it there just right. And so I'm assuming that when you're doing this kind of work in VR, it's a little bit of that, right? Like, is it like, are the tools that you're using, is it really like sculpting and painting, or is it just an interface that happens to be in VR, you know, but you're still using cubes and primitives and stuff like that?
Oh, I'm not using cubes and primitives at all. No,
Okay.
it's like sculpting. It's almost like whipping cream, like whipped cream. No, it's almost like shaving cream in space that you can
Nice.
spray out, you know, and then just like grab and pull and stuff. So the farther I am away from primitives, the happier I am. Yeah, and you definitely don't want to go into VR with no prep. That's when you really kind of fall apart, because it's just it's not beyond even just looking at a blank page, like you're inside of the blank page. So I think that the best way to go in is with an image already done that you can pull from and
Yeah.
pull colors.
Got it.
and
Okay,
things
so
like
then, so the advantage for using this blend project as an example is you can set up the base geometry. We're going to have an island that's roughly this shape, but we want grass all over it and flowers. And you can literally walk up to it and just kind of,
Yep.
you know, just move your hand and now there's grass. And
Yep.
so
Spray
yeah.
and pull, and you can use stamps and copy and stuff. And it's just kind of like being able to stand back and sort of take a
Yeah.
look. It reminds me of physically painting, honestly, where you're actually having to stand back. I have bad eyes, and I used to wear my glasses when I was painting so I could blur it. Just take them down and blur, you know, and just really kind
Yeah,
of like
do a little value study. Just see
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So it's just a bit more like that in VR. I just love it so much.
That's really interesting because, I mean, you know, again, I said this already, but like so much of digital art is trying to make it look imperfect, right? Especially in 3D, right? There's entire like companies built on selling you things that make it easier to make it look imperfect. And if you just actually draw the thing in 3D space with your hand, it's imperfect
Yep.
by the very nature of it.
Yeah.
So do you know, like, how common is this thing that, you know, this VR workflow that, you know, is it safe to say you helped pioneer it? Is that
Oh.
too strong? Or let's go with that.
Oh my gosh. Well, I don't know. I think I definitely was part of the team that brought it to the forefront,
Yeah.
at least in our in our sort of practice. I don't know. I don't think it's super common. I think there's still some big roadblocks. A lot of people have the standalone headsets, but not the big monster computers that can run it. I mean, I didn't get the meshes out of VR until I had the Gunner team behind me.
Right.
You know, it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be, but there were still just some hoops to jump through and a lot of problem solving. So I hope that it'll be even easier in the future, but I still think people should use it more often.
So are you still, so the Vive, I haven't heard that name in years
Oh, no,
now,
yeah,
really,
I'm not using the Vive.
Yeah, it's like my son has a Quest 2.
Uh-huh.
I'm dying to try the Apple Vision Pro, and I know the Quest 3 is out now. So like, what's the current iteration of this that you're using?
I am still using the Rift S, which is from like 2019. And that's a little bit it's more comfortable in my head. And Medium, the programs that I use that are sort of the heavy lifters for content creation and not just taking it in, it still has to be tethered to a big computer. So,
Okay.
Yep, I'm still using the old tech.
Gotcha. Okay. So, you know, the difference between the tech that you're using and like the Vision Pro, from what I understand, you know, it's like several generations newer and faster. And now too, I'm assuming that the one you're using can't really do what I've heard called pass through,
Right.
where, you know, you can see the environment, but then it's overlaying 3D things on it.
Right.
So with now these headsets that are, you know, the Vision Pro is pretty expensive still, but eventually that'll come down and it's going to be affordable for most people. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on sort of what kind of workflows this opens up. Like, do you think that it just becomes easier for people to do this, or are there new things that you think you can't really do with your setup now, but you could do,
Yeah.
if you had like a Vision Pro and the right software.
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, for what I like to do, I like to go into a place and make my 3D stuff. And what it would be more useful to me would be almost like if I could just have Cinema 4D with me in the VR space, which is not at all like what the Vision Pro is doing. They're trying to like replace your experience of sitting at a computer all day, and I know among other things, but in terms of me using this as a tool, it's actually not even necessarily that much more helpful. It would be a lot more interesting for AR, where you're actually seeing, creating something that's supposed to interface with an object, or maybe something on your desk or something like that, which I have been playing with a little bit. But no, we've talked about getting a Vision Pro at Duolingo and haven't played around with it yet. I think it would be interesting for something like the Duolingo app, if you could actually have things in front of you, or maybe you're quizzed on objects of what you call it in each space, things like that. I think Duolingo has a lot more potential use for it. I'm still super interested in using VR just as a calm, beautiful, detached place for drawing in space. I actually like for it to be separate from the world. I don't want to be able to check my phone when I'm in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I mean, like, I'm like picturing, like in my wife and my daughters, they're all dancers. And so they love watching these like 80s dance movies. And there's always a scene where the protagonist is like in some loft with no one there and it's kind of dimly lit. And then like their favorite song comes on and they can't help it and they're just dancing. And I'm kind of imagining you like drawing in space, like just like getting it out.
Oh, that is like correct. Honestly.
Yeah. Is that what it's like?
Yes. And actually, usually there is 80s music playing while I'm in there.
Perfect. I love it. What are we talking? Are we talking like, Depeche Mode 80s? Or are we talking?
Some Ace of Base. I guess that's 90s. Some David Bowie. I guess that's more 70s.
Oh, there you go. Well, I have David, Labyrinth was 80s. Okay, so we'll...
I love the Labyrinth.
Oh, yeah. That's the next podcast. We'll talk about... That I go deep with that movie. I love
oh my
that movie.
Gosh, me too.
Yeah, that's one of my faves all time. And Neverending Story. That would be. I put those two very close together.
The first thing I ever drew in VR space was Artax.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so for anyone who's maybe a little younger than us hasn't seen this movie, that is the saddest death in the history of cinema. I don't even think I can watch it anymore.
No.
It's too painful.
It's his only friend just getting sucked down into the mud. And that was I don't know why.
Gets you every time.
I drew that in VR the first time I ever used tilt brush.
Wow.
And then pulled on his face. Like, Artax.
I'm gonna have to go watch Neverending Story with my kids and torture them. And I'm also gonna have to try tilt brush because I've never actually tried this. It sounds so fun.
You've never tried it, Joey?
I literally haven't. Yeah. I mean, I've used my son's headset. Like I've shot zombies with it, but I haven't actually like painted or drawn with it.
Oh, it's such a different experience. Also, you're not zooming around, so it doesn't make you as sick. Right. If there's anybody that's felt sick from, video games, you're sitting quietly. And I think they try to make the drawing spaces kind of meditative. It's a beautiful experience, I have to say.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. All right. So I'm going to check this out. Everyone, by the way, everything we're talking about, we're going to have show notes. And you can go to Collin's site and you can see some work that you've done using VR and get a little bit of a sense of it. So before we talk about Duolingo, I do want to ask you about AI, because it's 2024. We have to talk about AI. And about a week before we started recording this podcast, Sora came out. And I assume by the time the podcast actually drops, some other crazy thing will happen.
Right.
Now, why don't we start here? Like, how do you feel just in general about all this AI stuff?
Yeah, it's tough. I actually feel a lot for people that don't happen to be in this moment tethered to a really strong team. Mm-hmm. I feel very lucky that I'm kind of, I don't know. I'm just like seeing other people during the day. We're talking about it. We're making things together. We have that momentum right now. So I'm sort of in a strong place as this hits me. So I think if I wasn't, and other times in my career that I haven't been, it would feel even more like existentially dreadful. Mm-hmm. So I feel for people that are getting hit at it at a time like that. I I don't know. I definitely feel anxious. I don't feel like it's the end.
Right.
Just like I'm more on the side of it will never be what we are. And yeah, I do. I also don't feel like it's all evil.
Right.
I feel like it's never served anybody to totally reject new tech. We do have to get to a point where it's ethical, where it's not
Right.
pulling from stolen work. And I wonder what it'll look like at that point. But oh my gosh, even talking about AI, it's doing so many things. I just heard an ad for like Travelocity or whatever saying, if you're really into bread, let AI create a bread like vacation for you, bread themed or whatever.
That's the killer app right there.
And apparently like that's a real thing. It can really find like amazing tours or whatever. Fine. It's doing all kinds of things like that, helping people with writing. And I'm hoping that we can find a way to make it our assistant, you know?
Yeah.
Like you were talking about in a recent episode, people need to have more output. It made me think about how like the old masters as painters used to paint in the sort of main lines and do the face, and they would let the students do the hands, you know? And actually AI does bad hands, but I'm hoping it can be sort of, we can whip it into shape to sort of help us out that way. But no, I'm not naive to the fact that it's going to shake everything up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I will say up until Sora came out very recently, my take on it, so the ethical side of it, that's kind of a separate conversation. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that too. But just as far as like, is this going to end, you know, the careers of every motion designer? I really don't think that that's going to happen at all.
Yeah.
But at the time when I was right before Sora came out, I was like, I just don't see how video generation is ever going to be good enough for most professional stuff. And even if it is good enough, is it going to be art directable enough?
Right.
Like, are you going to be able to control, like, make that character blink twice right now?
Right.
But don't change anything else.
Right.
Like, is that, and I was thinking, I just think we're so far from that, but you know, like we're 100 years away from that. Like, because, and you know this, like our world is taking something from 0 to 100%. And when you get to 90%, now the real hard work begins, and that takes just as long to get that last 10% as it did the first 90.
Right.
And so maybe with AI video, Sora comes out, okay, maybe we're at 90% now. Like some of that stuff is
it's pretty
amazing. Indistinguishable. Yeah.
It also does seem like that same sort of like 2008 deviant art style, you know? Like there's a lot of that sort of that same style that it looks like, but I know you can enter in things. It can do a lot of different styles too.
Yeah.
There's something we used to talk about at Gunner. Nick Forshee, one of the founders of Gunner, would talk about this a lot. And this was more like using 3D. If you would do something in 3D, get a render, and think, well, this looks good. This looks pretty done. But he would sort of point out how 3D tricks you that way because it looks rendered, but it's actually making decisions that you wouldn't have made in a thought out style frame. Like actually look how this reflection is making this ugly black line on the side of something that's supposed to be colors and things like that. And I think that happens turbo time with AI. You know, it's making all kinds of decisions that would I actually want it to look like that? And how the heck would you art direct that? And that's still going to need sort of a human sensibility.
Yeah. And you have to know, like as an example, we just did, we use Midjourney and we use DALL-E mostly just for like YouTube thumbnail assets because we have to make 1 million thumbnails for every piece of content. And it's like, okay, we needed an iPad on a table with like a hand holding a stylus, right? Yeah, and you'd think there'd be 1 million stock photos of this, and there just aren't, or there's like not really good ones. And so we used AI to make that, and then we were like compositing stuff on the screen. And it's like, you don't even think about like, oh, well, how thin and bony should the hands be? How long should the fingers be? How big should the knuckles be before it looks weird? Why are those knuckles so big? And you get a picture that's like 90% usable, and it takes just as long to fix the weird, like, why is the thumbnail that shape?
Yeah.
That's what, you know.
Would
and
you
that's
go in
just
with Photoshop to fix that?
Yeah,
Or
we
just-
use Photoshop, and you know, and it's just a lot of like it's the same tricks that you've always used, right? To like fix stuff. You're just the base you're starting with was AI generated. And we're pretty careful now, especially because we've seen there's been companies sort of they get blasted on Twitter for better or worse because they use AI in like a thumbnail. So we try to only use it for assets at this point. But I think fairly soon you won't be able to tell at all, you know, like where it came from. You still kind of can. If it came out of Dolly, you can definitely tell. But yeah, I mean, so that's kind of like how we approach it. But the video side, I still feel like just you want to change one thing in a video, you have to. It's like so much more technical,
Right?
You know, and never mind animation. I haven't seen anything on the animated side that looks, you know, they've had some sort of Pixar 3D-ish looking things,
Right.
That Sora has put out that look pretty amazing. But then it's like, oh, can you add a little highlight in the eye of that character?
Right.
No.
Or change the acting. You know,
Right? Yeah.
like it's
Yeah,
moving, but it's still strange. I mean, I know that I wouldn't want to see like an AI therapist. Even if
Right.
they said the exact right things or the same things that a person would say, if I found out that, let's say I was like seeing somebody over Zoom or something, if I found out that was AI, I would feel so like, oh my God, it would hollow out the whole experience for me and feel so just like empty and like I couldn't trust what came. I don't know, even if it's the same words. And so
Yeah.
I think there's still some of that at play with the art stuff too.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because that's, you know, that's like almost a philosophical point, right? Like,
Yeah.
like I don't know, some people might look at it like, okay, a therapist's job is to listen to me and then say the correct sequence of words back that will reprogram me so I'm better. That's not what therapy is, but
Right.
like you know, like on some very surface level, that's what it looks like. And so an AI could probably do that just fine. And maybe some people would be okay with that. But there is something weird about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there just is, and I still can't quite articulate it. And this maybe leads into the ethical part. You know, I made this, I like thought experiments for this stuff. I think sometimes it clarifies. So like I made a video a while ago, and the thought experiment I proposed was if you had a human artist that just like went through every single image that Shutterstock owns and like just trained their brain on what stock photography looks like. And then they got so good at painting, they're like Norman Rockwell, where it looks like a painting. And so then you could just tell that person, hey, paint me, you know, you could be like Mid-Journey, but they would just paint something that looks like a stock photo.
Yeah. Yeah.
No one would be mad at that.
Right.
You know?
Right.
But when a computer does the same thing, it's different somehow.
I think
And is it as simple as like humans are better at it? Like, I don't know, you know?
Well, that's a great question. And I think the big difference is that millions of people could have access to that artist and they could have them do it instantly for themselves, you know? That what kind of work would be replaced by those,
Yeah.
that outcome, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's for sure, I think, where the emotional reaction comes from, because it's,
Yeah.
you know, I think on one level, there's like sort of this, a little bit of like disgust, like a machine is doing this thing
Right.
that like I revere. Like, I don't like that. But yeah, I think a lot of the emotional reaction is, well, like, what do you need me for? Like, if you have
exactly.
this thing that's $20 a month and can make whatever you want.
I know. I've heard people
yeah.
describe that anger is really just a fear of future needs not being met. And
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
I think that definitely is like what people are feeling, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally get it. And we're all just trying to grapple with it. Like on your site, you've got a couple of projects where you used Mid-Journey
Yeah.
in some way. I don't know how you used it. Like maybe talk about that. What were those projects and how'd you like using it?
I used those before it was really known how unethical Mid-Journey can be, you know?
Yeah.
So I feel a little bit of ick about it. But I decided to keep it up because, you know, it's just a record of where I was at that time. But yeah, just that idea of generating an idea. Like when I was talking about in grad school, trying to come up with how to compose music, and I didn't know what to do. So I would come up with a system for myself. Like I'll look at this map and create these rules or whatever, trying to find
Right.
ways to just jumpstart ideas. And I think it's really interesting for that. Now we just have to figure out a way to do it that's not ripping people off, you know?
Right.
Yeah, so I'm definitely not against it. I'm curious about it. We've had some great laughs around the office we tried to get Midjourney to create naked images of Dr. Phil.
It won't do that. I've tried.
It won't. We tried so hard. Peach bathing suit.
Yeah.
No, we've had a lot of fun with that, and it's funny. Even times when we really played around a lot with it, we still end up going to artists to design. We know that it's there.
Yeah.
But just more interesting stuff is coming out of people still.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's amazing right now for like making visual jokes that you wouldn't take the time to make, you know? We have this bot in our School of Motion Slack every morning. It comes up with like a Michelin star restaurant like dish, but the theme is that it has to be like some type of meat sculpted into the shape of a rat. It's called a meat rat. And then Dolly makes the picture and it posts this like it's like this beautifully lit plate of food with like a ground beef rat on it, and it describes it. And it's just one of those stupid things that I think is hilarious that like if AI didn't exist, this thing wouldn't happen,
right?
Because I'm not actually gonna like, you know, figure out how to make that image.
Yeah.
But it just does it. So yeah. Okay. So that's how we're using AI at School of Motion right now, is to make meat rats.
Meat rats.
Yeah. Let's okay. So I want to hear about Duolingo now. So we've gone through like your sort of your history as an artist, and then you get to Gunner, and it's this amazing studio and doing all this cool work. And then Duolingo acquires them, which like it makes so much sense. At the time, I was kind of shocked, like, whoa, I've never seen that happen. That's so cool. And Duolingo, just in case anyone doesn't know, it's a language learning app, and I think they're expanding it to teach other things too.
Math and music,
math and stuff, and yeah, which is really cool. But it's mostly known for like if you want to learn Spanish or something like that. It's great, and it's got a ton of character animation. Like the whole app, there's like this owl, and there's other characters, and they talk to you. So anyway, it seems like a very different beast than Gunner. So, you know, as much as you can tell us, like what was that like transitioning from Gunner to Duolingo, and like what's your day to day now? What do you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think what people hadn't seen is that Duolingo was one of our main clients for years. Mm-hmm. And they just were like our favorite people to work with. They were so fun and actually such a similar vibe to Gunner. And so they were growing their animation so much. Interesting side note. Normally in the animation world, you kind of finish your work and you send it off and you're just like, okay, bye-bye. Maybe I'll see you on TV or on the internet. But with Duolingo, you make something and then they can test how it does. Sometimes they do A/B tests, but there's like over 20 million daily active users, people using it. So you might be part of a test and not even realize it. So animation was like skyrocketing engagement, and even just sort of like when it was like the checkout, sort of like, do you want to try the paid thing? If stuff was animated, people were more often to be like, yeah. So they wanted so much more animation that basically they were like, okay, guys, we're ready to like put a ring on it or move on. Like we need to hire someone actually in-house, and we would love for that to be you, or we'll have to like let you go and find some separate people. So we decided to be absorbed. And we never thought that we would consider it, but they actually offered us a lot of creative freedom within the company. Like we could keep the Gunner name as a school, and we still use time between projects to do those explorations, that kind of like Gunner Instagram ideas that I talked about. It was part of the deal of the acquisition for us to still have time to make these experimental things. And the big asterisk is, even if it's not intellectual property, because we felt like a big strength of what made us who we are is the ability to just make something, just kind of visually dream on an idea. And without having to shoehorn that into being intellectual property, it's a place for artists to take a breather from the little green owl, who we love. But we want to be able to attract artists who come from all kinds of places too. So we made an Instagram account called inhouse.duolingo. It's kind of my baby. Nice. And It is just, yeah, it's a place where you will see some IP stuff there. It's sort of, we're trying to figure out that balance, but it's not the case for everything. So, and here's a funny story about it. Actually, a couple days ago, the Duolingo main account posted something that the artists had made. At the end of the year, they did, and I was on maternity leave, so I wasn't a part of it, kind of exquisite corpse of just like the same cell, but everybody tried a different kind of style on top of it. The Duolingo account posted it and then linked to in-house. And I happened to see it right away, and I was like, cut the link, tell them to take us off. And because we don't necessarily want the people who are pure Duolingo lovers, this account is for artists. It's for animators, and we want to be able to interface with the animation community on our own feet, basically, and not just sort of through the Duolingo world. And I hope that doesn't sound snobby to people that love Duolingo, but a lot of stuff on Gunner's Instagram, that kind of exploration and play, that energy now is being funneled into the in-house.duolingo account, as well as the app itself, for sure. So check it out. Yeah, my day-to-day looks very similar. It's the same office, the same people for the most part, but there is a lot more meetings, a lot more Zoom stuff. We have maybe 10 to 15 people in Detroit, and then another 10 to 15, I think, in Pittsburgh. So we actually have this sort of like other group that's out there who's really creative and smart and wonderful, and we'll fly back and forth and spend like a Tuesday to Friday there or here. So those people are fascinating and really interesting. But yeah, it was part of the deal of the acquisition for us to still have time to make these experimental things. And the big asterisk is, even if it's not intellectual property, because we felt like a big strength of what made us who we are is the ability to just make something, just kind of visually dream on an idea. And without having to shoehorn that into being intellectual property, we feel like it's the most valuable. It's a place for artists to take a breather from the little green owl, who we love, but we want to be able to attract artists who come from all kinds of places too. So we made an Instagram account called inhouse.duolingo. It's kind of my baby. Nice. And it is just, yeah, it's a place where you will see some IP stuff there. It's sort of, we're trying to figure out that balance, but it's not the case for everything. So, and here's a funny story about it. Actually, a couple days ago, the Duolingo main account posted something that the artists had made. At the end of the year, they did, and I was on maternity leave, so I wasn't a part of it, kind of exquisite corpse of just like the same cell, but everybody tried a different kind of style on top of it. The Duolingo account posted it and then linked to in-house. And I happened to see it right away, and I was like, cut the link, tell them to take us off. And because we don't necessarily want the people who are pure Duolingo lovers, this account is for artists. It's for animators, and we want to be able to interface with the animation community on our own feet, basically, and not just sort of through the Duolingo world. And I hope that doesn't sound snobby to people that love Duolingo, but a lot of stuff on Gunner's Instagram, that kind of exploration and play, that energy now is being funneled into the in-house.duolingo account, as well as the app itself, for sure. So check it out.
That's awesome. And what kind of work are you specifically working on? Are you doing some of the character animation? Are you working on sort of non-interactive stuff, or is it all for the app?
It'll sort of switch off. Sometimes we'll do something for like their socials. Like my last project before my maternity leave was like Duo bouncing around doing like a disco dance. And I was doing like compositing with lights and kind of some 3D stuff and grain. And it was kind of the sort of warm, painterly kind of compositing kind of stuff. I do a lot more of that than I thought I was going to. I did a lot with interactive little icons and stuff like that. When I come back, I think I'm going to work on something that's called the DuoCon intro. There's a conference, and we make basically a little short film every year for that. Last year it was about Duo kind of in his control room trying to get somebody to get their streak going again. So So yeah, it does feel similar. I mean, obviously it's within this world of Duolingo for the most part. So that's probably the biggest difference is the stylistic diversity that Gunnar had. But I'm a language nerd. I studied French literature. I think I would have studied linguistics if I knew that that existed.
Yeah.
The structure of language and relationships of words and meanings and syntax. I think that's all really interesting. And that's sort of coming to play a bit more at Duolingo too.
Interesting. That's really cool. I assume you've seen the movie The Arrival.
Yeah.
Yeah. I probably love that movie.
Yeah.
So I mean, it sounds kind of like, the best possible outcome, for an acquisition like this. I mean, a lot of acquisitions fail. They don't really go well. And what, the story you just told, that's kind of what I had assumed, was that it came down to Duolingo is either going to have to like go through the hassle and expense and figuring out how to build their own internal animation team, which is not hard. I mean, not easy. It's very hard. Or they can just like acquire their favorite one, right? Which was the smart move. Is there anything, I mean, it's a publicly traded company, right? So there's like a whole different set of rules and regulations and all this kind of stuff. I've actually never worked for a publicly traded company, but like I have friends who have started companies, they get acquired by publicly traded companies and they're like, oh my God, like I have to care what the stock price is, like stuff like that. Is there anything like that that was kind of jarring, like going from this little family style, studio to now this thing that you can buy stock in? Like,
oh my gosh,
market?
It was wild. Yeah, it was honestly, I think I had whiplash for a year. And again, I did this whole jump with like some very close friends too, that we did it all together. So that helped so much to be able to process it together. But there's some, we still kind of laugh. It's very, it's a corporate thing, even though Duolingo is very silly and very warm. And we've even had dinner with the CEO. Luis Van On is so wonderful. And Severin Hacker, the two founders. It still feels like everybody has the same t-shirt on sometimes,
Yeah.
And it just kind of is what it is. We sort of enjoy it. And it's funny, people from Pittsburgh have been coming out to Detroit because they just hear like, oh, there's this new energy, of like the Detroit, they actually created a Duolingo office in Detroit to house us.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And people have been wanting to come out and hang out with us. And I think that we've added, some exciting energy, and it's been really wonderful that way.
That's so cool. All right. So last question. I want to ask you about something else that you wrote on the little questionnaire. So we've said it a few times, but you're on maternity leave now as of this recording, which is awesome. And you said, I'm very into leveraging this experience into meaningful work right now. I think it's something we can all do. Things that seem difficult can become our best work, even if it's quiet and small. And I just thought that was beautiful, but I wasn't quite sure what it meant. So what did you mean when you said that?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I guess I just feel like going over to Duolingo from Gunnar, I think created a big shift in how I saw myself too as an artist. I think it just was a big identity shift.
Yeah.
To go from Gunnar to Duolingo, and it sort of brought me back to my own sort of personal work. Last summer, I was pregnant and chasing a toddler around, but I still had this really strong urge to make art, and I had maybe like 15 minutes a day to myself.
Yeah.
This is a little vulnerable, but whatever. If we're not here to overshare, then what are we even doing?
Love it.
Because I had sort of made a name for myself using VR, I think a part of me was afraid that only if I had to use VR in things that I was putting out in the world to sort of seem relevant, or I thought that would be how I would seem interesting to people. But so at one point last summer, I created this little loop that was just a quiet little like abstract loop from a gesture, from like kind of a hand gesture. And I created a simple little violin loop and threw my son's voice in there. And that resonated with people. And again, I'm just speaking about the world of Instagram, fortunately or unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it really resonated with people. And it took just a couple hours to make. And I just really want to encourage people to make things, even if they're small and even if you don't have a lot of time. And it's even if it's not what you think you're supposed to be making. Actually, even getting back to Matisse, like when I said look up Matisse cutouts for people, he spent most of his career as a painter, which is a really physical endeavor. It's physical. But then he was diagnosed with cancer, I think it was in 1941, and all of a sudden he was stuck in bed. And that's why he started making those cutouts with paper. That is just responding to difficult circumstances can actually shape you in a really meaningful way.
I'm wondering if you can tie that idea in with, really damn well now, you start having kids, the amount of free time, and not just time, but like free energy that you have to devote to your own personal endeavors changed,
Oh my gosh.
And I can tell you, because my youngest now is 9, so like it does come back a little bit, like it never fully comes back, but you will have more free time. I know your kids are little. But how has that shifted, I guess, the way you look at your personal stuff or these little experiments?
Yeah. Oh, it's so ironic because I've actually never felt more inspired to make things.
Yeah.
I have so many more ideas. I mean, even just the sheer presence that you have is crazy. I just spent 20 minutes with my son looking at the way light bounced off of his golden balloon in his room, this little balloon he had. It was beautiful. And hurry, we've got to get ready,
Yeah.
I just try to collect it and just hold on for dear life to the time that I have. And I guess giving up on ideas that I have to be making bigger things, just letting those be that's why I said quiet and small. But you got to bring the action. That's what I keep trying to tell myself. You got to ship it, even if you're dragging on the floor and just it's midnight and you're this is not a good time to post for the algorithm. I don't care.
Just do it anyway.
Out. Just do it anyway. I mean, I actually went through years of infertility, and people who know me well will be like, oh God, she's talking about it again. But I think it's really important.
Always talking about her eggs, that Collin.
Always talking about my eggs. Oh gosh. Well, it just was this mind-numbingly difficult time.
Yeah.
And if anybody's lucky enough that a difficulty it's sort of buying them more time or something like that, I'm getting disappointed and I have more time than I wanted because I wanted to do something else. Just to use that to make things. That's why I actually knocked on Gunner's door, was because I was challenging myself to do something that would expand my world because I was feeling so down about other things. So I feel really strongly about that as advice for artists.
I really want to thank Collin for coming on and being so open about her life and her experiences. Make sure to check out her work. The link is in the show notes. And follow inhouse.duolingo on Instagram to see what she and the other talented artists over there are up to. Thank you so much for watching or listening. And please subscribe or or leave a review if you dug this episode. It really helps us grow and keep doing interviews like this. That is it. Peace.